Hello and welcome to my knitting podcast, episode 5. Hi everyone, my name's Sophie and welcome to Soph Knits Daily. It's been about a month since I did my last knitting podcast, so unsurprisingly I have a fair few things to show you today. I've managed to cast on a few projects and make a bit of progress on my other projects, so it may be a bit of a longer episode. Feel free to grab yourself a drink and some knitting and I'll take you through my finished objects. So my one and only finished object for today's episode is what I'm wearing. This is the Camisole number 9 by My Favourite Things Knitwear, and I knit this in Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino in the colour Bark. The cotton merino is a 70% cotton and 30% merino blend, and I've really enjoyed working with this yarn. I like that it has the elasticity of merino and isn't as kind of hard on my hands as cotton normally is, but it also feels like a summer garment when I'm wearing it. It's not overly hot, it feels breathable, and it just is the perfect summer yarn. It's super soft, hopefully very durable. I've had a few wears out of this, but not really enough to comment on the durability of the yarn. But from the way that it's worked up when I've been knitting the project and the first few wears that I've had, I definitely recommend this yarn. So I'll talk you through the pattern. This pattern is knitted on 3mm needles and I use the recommended needle size. It recommends a negative ease of 12 to 15 centimetres, and because of that I knit the size medium to aim for a 78 centimetre bust, which is exactly what I achieved. So I have about 15 centimetres negative ease in this top, and I was a bit unsure last time if I would like that much negative ease. I've never knit a garment before with any negative ease, so 15 centimetres is quite a big jump. But I am really happy with how this garment fits. It doesn't feel too tight or constricting. It feels like it sits very comfortably. It's not too tight on my stomach, which is definitely what I prefer. I wanted something to be a bit looser around my stomach, but maybe a bit tighter around my bust. And that's definitely what I've achieved with this camisole. The stitches around my bust do pull slightly because of the negative ease, but they don't pull too much that the garment is see-through in any way. That might be because I've used a darker colour yarn, but I think this would be kind of consistent with any other colour yarn because the stitches are fairly tight. And I just think overall this camisole fits really flattering and feels very comfortable to wear. I think you'd be able to dress it up quite easily, and you could wear it with skirts or nicer trousers and dress it down as well for the daytime with maybe linen trousers or some jeans. So it's a very versatile piece and one that I will definitely be getting a lot of wear out of. The only thing that is a slight shame is it's like half a centimetre to a centimetre off covering my bra strap entirely. I've got my bra straps kind of tucked in at the moment, but to move around and with wear, the strap does kind of show and come out, and I think it would be slightly more comfortable and I'd feel more comfortable in it if the straps fit a bit wider, but I also think that's kind of partly on me. You can't expect every knitted summer piece to exactly fit around the bra that you have or prefer wearing. Maybe I just need to look to find a bra that fits this top more comfortably, because I am really happy with the style, kind of more racer back-like style of this tank top. I think that is flattering. So that's the only thing that I'll have to kind of look into. And a few updates from the concerns that I had in my last knitting podcast was that the bottom hem was curling up quite significantly. I couldn't seem to get the double folded hem at the bottom to sit flat, and that has been completely fixed with blocking. I didn't aggressively block this top. I don't have my blocking mats with me and I wasn't able to pin it out when blocking, so I just soaked the garment, kind of dried it a little bit and laid it flat as it wanted to sit, and there's no kind of rolling of that bottom hem now, so I'm very happy with that. The other concern that I had was that I don't think I'd sewed down the double folded kind of armhole particularly well, and at some points it was misaligned with where it should have been folded down, and this was causing a bit of rippling around the kind of arm here. And I can still see that rippling post blocking when this garment is off and just laid flat. But because of the negative ease and the kind of stretch and tightness of the garment at the top, I don't think you can see that rippling at all when I'm wearing it. If you have that issue, then I wouldn't kind of be concerned about it. When you wear it, I don't think it's very obvious at all. So overall, I'd definitely recommend this pattern. The pattern itself was very easy to follow and I really like the finished outcome. However, I did say in my last podcast, this seemed to take absolutely ages to knit. The stitches are tiny, the needle is tiny. I wanted it to be full length. I don't really like anything to be cropped. And because of that, there's a considerable amount of knitting to do, more than you really realise when you're kind of looking at the pattern in the pattern photos. So just bear that in mind if you're casting this on. It is a possibly more longer term project than you might expect, but definitely one that I really like the finished object of and will definitely get a lot of use out of. So moving on to my works in progress, the first thing I have is the Ebba Pullover by Sari Nordlund. In my last knitting podcast, I'd finished the back panel and I think I was on the front panels, but since then I finished the 2 front panels and connected the front and back in the round. I've almost finished the lace repeats for the body. I think I've got 2 of the lace repeats left to meet the length, and then there's only about 4 or 5 centimeters of ribbon at the bottom. So yeah, almost finished the body, so I'm making good progress on this, but there's a few things that I'd like to comment on. Before I forget, the yarn is Rosários for Alvor in the colour 13, which is a yellowy mustardy colour. And the content of this yarn is 50% linen and 50% wool, which makes it absolutely perfect for a summer garment. And it was a summer garment that I had in mind when I started knitting this, although the pattern isn't written as a summer garment. Sari Nordlund recommends a DK weight yarn and to be knit on 3.5mm needles. But because I wanted a summer garment, I'm using a sport weight yarn. This yarn is 310 meters to 100 grams, and I'm using 4.5mm needles to get slightly closer to gauge, or just slightly more of an open gauge than Sari Nordlund has. I have 19 stitches to 10 centimeters, whereas Sari Nordlund recommends 21 stitches to 10 centimeters. And because of that, I'm knitting the size 4 to hopefully get the measurements for the size 3 that will give me about 25 centimeters positive ease. At the moment, the bust circumference for this garment is 110 centimeters, so will give me 15 centimeters positive ease, which is closer to the size 2 than the size 3, which is what I was aiming for. But I expect that this is going to really open up and grow a lot with blocking. I think this lace pattern will really open, so I feel confident that post blocking I'll be able to kind of reach that 20-25 centimeters positive ease, which I'm looking for. I talked a bit in my last podcast, episode 4, about the modification I'd made to the side panel of the jumper by adding in an extra cable. So if you want a bit more detail on that, then I'd head over there. But the short story is, Sari Nordlund has used a section of reverse stockinette at the side of the jumper, and I think this is in order to more easily grade the sizes. A full kind of lace panel repeat is about 9-10 centimeters wide, so I think it would be very difficult to, or a bit more difficult to grade the sizes using cables or using the lace pattern, all the way across the jumper. So because of this, there's a section of reverse stockinette that is larger as the sizes go up. And I really didn't like this section of reverse stockinette. I think it felt like it didn't really flow very well with the rest of the kind of really pretty cable-like lace. So I wanted to change that. And what I found for the size 4 is that the section of reverse stockinette at the side was very similar to the number of stitches you need for a half lace repeat. So I just subbed in that half lace repeat at the side, and I think it looks really nice, especially when the front and back sides come together and you kind of get that full lace repeat at the side. I think it looks really cohesive, and I'm so happy I made that modification. I think it looks a lot better, if I'm honest. I will be adding some notes to my Ravelry about that if you are looking to do that modification yourself. I do apologise that I haven't been very good at keeping my Ravelry updated, but that's something that I'm definitely going to focus on over the next week. Also with the Ebba pullover, I don't know if it's because my gauge is different or because I've used a sport weight yarn rather than a DK weight yarn, but I seem to be using a lot less meterage of yarn than Sari Nordlund recommends. I expected at this point I'd have finished the second ball of yarn and I'd be able to add the collar and then go back to the body, which is what I normally do. I like adding the collar a bit before because it makes it look kind of more put together and more like a jumper, but I'm still on my second ball of yarn and I've got a fair amount left. I bought 5 balls of this yarn based upon the meterage that Sari Nordlund recommends, and I think I'll get away with only using 3. So I don't know if that's kind of error or overestimation in Sari Nordlund's pattern, or just purely for the fact that I'm knitting off gauge. But yeah, that's just something to consider if you're looking at knitting this piece. My final comment on the Ebba pullover is I did make a mistake in the lace pattern, and I didn't notice this mistake until about 20 centimetres after. I was pretty frustrated when I found this mistake, and I thought I'm just going to have to rip it all back because it will be the only thing I'll be able to see when I'm wearing it, particularly because the mistake is in the front panel, kind of right at the centre of my chest where you'd see it more obviously. The mistake is that in a row I'd put a yarn over in place of a knit 2 together. I'd kind of swapped them about. So the lace detailing didn't quite align and I was missing a yarn over, and the kind of lace detail went a bit wonky, and I couldn't easily find a way to just pull that row of stitches back to correct that. So what I did instead, and I don't know how easily you'll be able to see this on the footage, so I do apologise if you can't see very well, but I used kind of like a duplicate stitch to fill in where the yarn over was and make it look like a knit 2 together. I kind of wove a bit of yarn through, trying to replicate what a knit 2 together stitch would look like over that yarn over, so you can't see kind of a hole where there isn't supposed to be a hole. And where I wanted there to be a yarn over, where there was instead a knit 2 together, I manually have kind of tried to pull the yarn apart slightly and create a hole just by adjusting the stitches around to kind of open up a space in the knit so that it looks like a hole where a yarn over would be. So I don't think it's very obvious, if I'm honest, and maybe I didn't even really need to kind of go back and do that. You might just not have noticed, or it might have been just a nice little quirk of the hand knit jumper, but I just feel a lot happier not being able to see kind of a wonky section. I think I'm just a bit of a perfectionist and I like everything to look completely neat. So yeah, I'm happy with how that little mistake was fixed. The next thing I have to speak about is a new cast on, and this is the Brigitte bag by Gregoria Fibres. This is a lace detailed bag worked from the bottom up, and the pattern recommends a kind of linen, cotton, silk or viscose blend like the Sandnes Garn Line, but instead I'm using 100% cotton. This is the Mondial Basic Cotton in a yellowy white kind of mild tie-dye like colour. And my aim with this colour and pattern combination is that I wanted the lace detail to look like shells, and I think I've really achieved that. I definitely think it looks like shells, every shell you'd find on the beach, and I'm really happy with how summery and beachy the start of this bag looks. So I didn't do a gauge swatch for this knit, so everything I have to say is purely based on the fact I should have done a gauge swatch and I didn't, but the pattern recommends 2.5mm needles, and it specifies in the pattern that you are to knit a very tight fabric. I didn't know whether to use 2.5mm needles as the pattern recommends or 3mm needles, as I am a very tight knitter, so I do normally go up a needle size, but I ended up going with the 2.5mm needles, and unsurprisingly I have a smaller bag than what the pattern recommends. I've found it difficult to measure my gauge exactly because the lace pattern is kind of hard to count the stitches for, but the bag is supposed to be 13.5 inches wide and my bag is 11 inches wide, so 2.5 inches smaller than recommended, which is it's quite a considerable difference. There are a few reasons that I'm not ripping this back and I'm not annoyed about it, and I'll talk you through those. So it is just a bag, kind of bags don't have to be a certain size, it's not like a garment that has to fit kind of perfectly. So I don't mind it being a smaller bag. But the other thing is the pattern recommends a cotton, viscose or silk and linen blend, which holds its structure a bit better than 100% cotton. My bag is knit in 100% cotton, which will stretch out with wear. It's a bag, it's going to hold heavy objects, it is going to stretch, so I'm happy to start with a tighter fabric and it stretch out to a size that's similar to what the pattern recommends, rather than knitting the size the pattern recommends and then it's stretching out far too big. If I'm really happy with the smaller size bag once I finish, then I will be putting a lining into this bag. The pattern doesn't talk you through how to do a lining, but I've done a lining in a few bags before, so it shouldn't be too difficult. And the lining would just help prevent the fabric from stretching out too much. But if it is that I don't like how it's so small and I want it to be bigger, then I won't put a lining in. I'll just let the fabric stretch out over time and maybe put a lining in when it gets to the size that I'm happy with. I'm not surprised that my gauge is tighter because I am a tight knitter, but I think the other thing that adds to my gauge being so tight this time is the fact I've used metal needles. I normally use wooden needles as it does make my gauge a bit looser, there's less friction on the needle, so I hold my stitches less tightly as I'm not worried about the stitches falling off the needle. But with this pattern, I've chose to use metal needles. This is because there's a section in the pattern where you do a lot of knit 4 together, and I just don't think I'd be able to get a wooden needle through 4 cotton stitches. I really need the sharpness of the point on a metal needle, and I also really need the strength of a metal needle. I have bent these needles slightly trying to get my needle through the 4 stitches together, and I'm quite easily able to bend the metal needle back, but if that was a wooden needle it would have broken. I have been adjusting my tension kind of manually on the round before the knit 4 together round so that I can more easily get my needle through, but the metal needles definitely really help with that. Ultimately, I think I would have got gauge if I'd have knit this pattern on 3mm metal needles. That would have been perfect, but I'm definitely not going to go back now for the reasons I've said. I'm really happy with the way that it's working up, and it's quite a mindless knit now. It's nice to get through a kind of shell repeat and just see the bag working up. So I'll work the length of the bag till either I get through most of my yarn or I'm happy with the size of it, and then comes the probably more difficult process of knitting some twisted I-cord straps. So I'll keep you updated on that one when this pattern gets a bit more complicated. So next I have my Buggiflooer headband by Alison Rendall. If you've seen my video on Fair Isle, I spoke a few times about being excited and wanting to cast this on, and that's exactly what I did when I finished my cowl that I showed you in that video. But this headband doesn't fit, and that's purely because, again, I didn't do a gauge swatch and I should have done a gauge swatch. So I'll go through the pattern first. The pattern is a Fair Isle pattern and it recommends 8 different colours of Jamiesons and Smith 2-ply, which is a fingering weight yarn. I did have 8 colours of the fingering weight yarn, but not the colours that Alison recommends in the pattern. And when I was trying to put my colours together in the pattern, I just couldn't find a way to make the colours all look nice together. It really is a minefield and something that I haven't got much practice in organising colours in a way that kind of flows and looks seamless and works well with a Fair Isle piece, and that's why they're writing the farewell patterns and not me. So instead of using the 8 colours, I just chose 3 colours and knit the most prominent or like dominant colour for the motif in the pattern. And I'm really happy with the way that these 3 colours look together. The colours are Copper and Mix by Jamieson of Shetland and Thyme by Jamiesons and Smith. I knit this pattern on the recommended needles, which is 3mm needles, and I thought that would be fine because, as I've said before, I'm a tight knitter, so I thought I'd actually probably get a headband that is smaller than what the pattern recommends. But instead, I have a headband that is 8 centimetres bigger than what the pattern is looking for. And because of that, these 8 centimetres, it absolutely does not fit. It's also 1.5 centimetres wider than what the pattern recommends, so it just looks funny on my head. It doesn't fit as a headband would. It looks more like a cowl really, although it's then too kind of short to be a cowl. So in its current form, it's unwearable. I also think my tension loosened throughout the knit because the ribbon section at the start looks incredibly different to the ribbon section at the end, at the bottom, and they're both knit on the same needle size. So I think, I've just got a bit looser with my two-handed colour work tension. So what to do with this piece? I think it's really beautiful. I don't like to have any of my knitted pieces just be display pieces. I like to get wear out of my pieces. So I could unravel this and use the yarn for something else, although the yarn is very, very sticky, so it wouldn't be an enjoyable unraveling experience. And I'm also not sure what I'd use the yarn for. I did come up with an idea, possibly in a dream or just before I was falling asleep, and had to quickly scramble and write it down. But the idea I've come up with to potentially make this headband work as a headband is to fold the ribbing sections in, pick up stitches on both sides of the ribbon sections and knit a section of tighter ribbing on the inside of the headband, possibly a 2x2 rib on smaller needles. This will hopefully, if my idea works, pull the headband in, so cinch it in tighter so that it fits more tightly to my head, but also because the headband then will be double the thickness. The double thickness should mean that the headband fits tighter to my head as well. The reason this is a bit more complicated is that I really want this centre motif to be the main feature and the outside of the headband, and I don't want to alter that centre motif in any way. So hopefully turning the ribbing in and adding another section of tighter ribbing will work, but this seems like a bit of an ambitious fix, and I'm not entirely sure if the idea that I have in my head is going to translate into something that actually works. So we'll see how this comes together. My next work in progress is Sheep by Susan B. Anderson. This pattern was really kindly gifted by a viewer, so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I've made a bit of progress on this sheep since the last time I showed it. The thing that was holding me back is that I didn't have my toy stuffing to be able to stuff the sheep. And I got some really good recommendations in my last podcast that I should stuff this toy with Herdwick fleece or some Herdwick yarn. And I really, really love that. I wish I could keep this little Herdwick sheep completely Herdwick authentic, but I just don't have enough of the Herdwick yarn to be able to stuff it. And this sheep is larger than I expected it to be, so I needed a fair amount of toy stuffing. So I've just gone with the general polyester toy stuffing. If you haven't seen my last knitting podcast, then the Herdwick yarn is a cone of yarn that I found in a charity shop in Scotland for 50p, and I wanted to keep the Herdwick yarn authentically Herdwick by producing a little Herdwick sheep. And I'm really, really happy with how this is looking so far. It's knitting up really quickly. It's really enjoyable to use a few different techniques in knitting a toy. I've never knit a toy before, so I'm enjoying that. And I think you can make it kind of quirky and give the sheep a bit of personality depending on what yarn you knit it with and how you kind of make the face look with the little features. So yeah, I'm really enjoying working on it. It's a bit of a fun, different project for me. I have made a few mistakes with this pattern, the main one being that my sheep is looking sideways, and this is because I don't think I've arranged my stitches onto the right needles when I was sewing up the back of the sheep and attaching or creating the head of the sheep. I definitely think this is a me problem in just misreading the pattern, because from what I can see in other Ravelry patterns, this isn't an issue, but I don't mind it. It gives the sheep a bit of character. All I have left to do on this is knit the 4 legs and block this piece. I was saying last time that my loop stitches don't look like the loop stitches Susan B. Anderson shows in the pattern, and this is because my loops are coiled. They're not kind of perfectly formed loops. And I had a few really helpful comments in my last video that this could possibly be because the yarn on the cone still has a bit of spinning oil in it, and this is kind of causing those coils. And the recommendations in the comments was that when this is blocked and soaked, the spinning oil will kind of come out and those loop stitches will plump up a bit and look more like loop stitches. So we'll see if that happens. I don't mind the loop stitches being a bit coiled because it makes the sheep look a bit rustic and hardy, which is exactly like a Herdwick sheep. But I'm really happy with the sheep. Once finished, it's going to sit on the dashboard of my van and be a little mascot for our travels. So I'm excited to get it done and show you in the next podcast. So that's all I have to show you for kind of patterned projects. The only other thing that I've been working on over this past month is using my drop spindle. I bought a drop spindle on the Isle of Skye and I didn't touch it for a couple of weeks. I did find it slightly scary, but I picked it up when I had a bit of free time and became very, very quickly obsessed. I really enjoyed the feel of the fibre on the drop spindle, and it's just such a dream to be able to spin up your own yarn. So on Skye, I bought the drop spindle with a few different wool tops to try out. 2 of them being unwashed fleece. I know that this dark brown one is Hebridean, but I'm not sure what the white one is. The white one spun up really, really nicely. I was able to get a fairly even weight, and for a lot of it, I was able to spin up somewhat of like a lace sport weight, but I didn't have as much of the white top as I expected to have. I had a fair amount of the brown Hebridean top. So I don't know much about spinning, so I do apologise if my terminology is wrong, but when I was spinning this Hebridean, I was able to get quite a tight spin, and it appeared to be maybe like a finger in sport weight. But when I plied up 2 singles on the drop spindle, I lost a lot of the kind of tension in that spin when I was plying. So the 2 ply is a bit bulkier than I expected it to be, and I've lost a lot of that tension in the singles. So if you have any recommendations for kind of keeping the tension when plying yarn on a drop spindle, then I would really recommend those tips. I was a bit more cautious when I was plying the 2 singles of the Humbug yarn. This is a Humbug Blueface Leicester, and I had 2 25-gram wool tops that I've plied together. I'm much happier with how this 2-ply looks, but again, you can see quite a stark difference in my kind of consistency with the single compared to the 2-ply. So yeah, I really need to kind of keep practicing and see if I can hold that tension a bit better when plying my yarn. But for a first time go at using the drop spindle, I am very, very happy with the outcome. It's definitely something that I'm excited to continue practicing. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to use this yarn for, but it's definitely going to be for something special because I'm very proud with how it's turned out, and I picked this wool top up on my travels, so it already holds such special memories. So just for a bit of an update and future acquisitions, I am now reunited with my yarn stash, so I have a fair amount of yarn to choose from when thinking up next projects and future cast-ons. I haven't made any firm decisions with kind of garment cast-ons, so I don't want to say something that will not actually happen. The only thing that I am definite on is adding some more squares to my Sweetshop blanket. So this is how I left my Sweetshop blanket a couple months ago, and since spending 2 months in the van, I've acquired a few 10-gram mini skeins and some leftovers from yarn that I've used whilst travelling for the past 2 months. So I'll be adding them to my Sweetshop blanket over the next few weeks, and this is going to be quite a slow project, just adding on squares as and when I have the yarn to add on, but I'm very happy to add in the squares from the travels, as again it's nice special memories of different places that we've been. I think that's all that I have to show you today. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast episode 5, and I hope to see you in the next podcast. If you liked this video, then consider liking or subscribing to the channel, and I hope you have a lovely day. Thanks for watching.